My name's Devinder. I'm here with Corey, who's a senior sales engineer with us, and Bram, who's a senior engineer at Qt. And we wanted to put together today's meeting to talk about architecting your Qt application. So we have two nice topics for us. Bram's going to talk about Core UI in a bit, but before that, Corey is going to talk to you a little bit about Design Studio. In fact, we want to hear from you guys about whether you've used Design Studio and how you're using it. And then let's kick it off with that. And just one question, Christine, is it possible for people to sort of raise their hands and actually ask the question like verbally as opposed to typing it in?
Yeah, so if the audience members aren't too shy, they can raise their hand, and I would be more than happy to unmute their mic so that they can talk to us live.
Perfect. Okay, so Corey, I guess we start off with you, and tell us about how you've been involved with Design Studio, and you know, how you've actually gotten to use it with.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Devinder. And yeah, like you said, I think we really want to be interactive with these kind of meetups. So want to create kind of a conversation and a forum for you to ask questions and share your opinions and thoughts on these tools. So if any of you guys have used Design Studio in a project or have explored it and kind of had some experiences that you would like to share or questions you want to ask, that's what we want to do with this time. It's not just about me sharing. So we'll have a couple of things to talk about if you don't have any questions though. So yeah, in general, Design Studio is sort of an adaptation of Qt Creator that's focused on UI designers and those kind of UX and UI developers. So some of the plugins are customized to kind of create a very nice graphical tool for drag and drop development on Qt Quick. And so it takes kind of what you've had for years in the Qt Creator designer and kind of expands on that and adds a ton of additional features and capabilities. And so Design Studio has become kind of the focal point of our development effort when it comes to graphical UI drag and drop and WYSIWYG type development. And so as far as what my experience has been, I've been working here at the Qt company now for about a year. Before that, I was a software developer for about 7 years using Qt Quick. And because Design Studio wasn't available at the time, we kind of began our work at my previous role and did our Qt Quick and QML development by hand. And it works great, has, you know, some advantages, right? And then there's some trade-offs. And so now that Design Studio is available, and since I've come on board, I've really been exploring what does the workflow look like. If I want to build out a UI in a tool like Photoshop or Sketch, I'm less familiar with the Mac and Sketch stuff, but with Photoshop, I've got some experience with that. So if I want to build out that UI and then I want to bring that into Design Studio, generate QML code out of that, and how do I structure my Photoshop file to make that work? How do I structure my project in Design Studio to kind of build that application in a way that we can iterate on it and make changes, but then also be able to put the backend and hooks to the backend? And then where do I take that from the design kind of focus tool over into Qt Creator and begin more of my developer centric, you know, C++ backends and some of the business logic backends and that kind of part of things. So, you know, part of what I'm doing in my role is, you know, providing guidance and recommendations to customers as they start to explore that. I've been part of a couple of different trainings where we've talked about some of these things and talked about challenges people have faced and what they want to do with it and what are the best practices. And I think we're finally kind of beginning to settle into a few good ideas on best practices for how to enable your workflow. And so that's kind of what I've been working on with regard to this. And yeah, I really want to hear, you know, more from you. And and then, you know, if we want, we can take a look at some of it, but mostly just about your experiences or questions that you have regarding that.
I think we have our first question, which I think is probably our most common question, is there a free version for Design Studio?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, it is. There is a community version available of Design Studio. Just like our Qt Creator, it's under the GPL v3 license, as well as the commercial for the dual license. There's the one element of Design Studio that is not subject to GPL, that is commercial only, are the bridge tools, which are what we call the plugins that work with the external designer applications like Photoshop and Sketch. And we're working on a few more right now for Adobe XD, Figma, and some others like that. So those are kind of independent and treated as a commercial only offering, just to optimize your workflow. So that's the only part that's really commercial only.
No other questions right now. So if you want to show us a little bit of what this thing looks like.
Sure. Yeah, let's take a look. And again, you know, we would love to hear from you as if you have any thoughts or experiences you'd want to share. Christine, I probably need you to stop sharing so that I can share my screen. Thank you very much.
Yeah, while he's setting that up, yeah, definitely. We hope that this ends up being sort of a meetup-like meeting where people feel free to ask questions as much as they want. Just hearing that one more time.
Cool. So this is Design Studio. I've pulled up a project that it uses a QML project format instead of a .pro if you're used to Qt Creator. And it's a very simplified project. The idea is to remove a lot of the barriers to getting your UI developed and running and prototyped. So rather than setting up kits and dealing with compilers and different targets and things like that, in Design Studio, the focus is basically on using the QML scene tool to build out UIs that are completely independent of the backend. And so that's got some advantages, right? If you follow that principle, then you develop kind of automatically with that whole model view controller or model view presenter design pattern. So your view is completely isolated into the components that you build in Design Studio. And so just like in the designer, all of the QML files that are generated by Design Studio have this .ui.qml extension. And if you open any of those, say if I open my screen 01 on the status content screen, it brings up the render, the live rendering of what all of those components look like. And within Design Studio, you can easily componentize things. So what you've got, if I look at the text in the QML, I've got a few font types that are non-visible, and then the status contents type here, which is the visible content. And so over in the navigator, there's this little chip looking icon. That indicates this is a component. So there's another .ui.qml file that defines this. And if I right click here or in the designer, I can go into the component. And it will open that up and it will crash promptly because of course it would.
Well, while you're getting that back up, I guess we do have a couple of questions for you.
Okay, great.
Now, the first one is, how is Designer different? How is this different from Designer that is available with PySide 2?
Okay, so with PySide 2, you're probably designing out like a Qt widgets commonly application, but you could do QML as well. So the designer that's in Qt Creator, we'll actually take a look at it here once I get Design Studio back up. We can just take a look at it now, but let's see if I take a look at the status tab content. So this is the actual project in Qt Creator with a .pro file. And so if I open this .ui QML, there we are. In Creator, we'll see that come back up. I'm gonna tax my my laptop's power right here.
Yeah.
Trying to load a lot of things, but the short version is, if hopefully we'll get to take a look at it. The short version is the designer in Qt Creator doesn't have as many of the properties that you have traditionally available. So
Yeah, they don't have the timeline, right? For one thing.
I think that's right. The timeline editor and all of that is not incorporated into Designer yet. Some of the ability to specify properties and bindings is different. Typically, Design Studio comes first now when it comes to these kinds of feature development. And then as they go forward, they'll backport the features that were brought into Design Studio into the designer in Qt Creator. So that's kind of the general workflow. But a lot of more development and testing effort is going into Design Studio, so you can be kind of assured that you're getting the latest and greatest feature set there. Another thing too, if any of you are like me, every time you open Qt Creator, it takes longer and longer to open, and that's due a lot to the number of plugins that you have enabled, and the designer is a big one. So if you go into help about plugins, you can actually uncheck the designer so that your Qt Creator launches faster if you're working in a project with Design Studio, and then Design Studio handles that side. So a minor workflow tweak, but I find it helpful.
Yeah, it's nice. One more for you. Sorry for the interruption. Tell me if you want to finish your thoughts first.
Oh, you're okay. No, go right ahead.
Okay, so one quick comment from someone, Michael. It was that kill your video to recoup a few cycles.
Yeah, that's a good point. Probably doesn't help that I'm running on a 4K monitor either.
Oh, yeah, that does not help. And then one question from Ed was, can you add a C++ model within Design Studio?
Great question. And so the short answer is no. Design Studio, as I said, kind of uses QML scene to render the QML, so it needs to be runnable by QML scene. The solution, and this is actually one of the things I've been working on a lot, is to provide a QML-based backend. So you can create a QML singleton. If you go into like your imports and your constants QML, so Design Studio, when you create a new project, will create an imports folder with the name of your project and this constants file. And that's a singleton by default. And you could add your own singleton as well. But it's just a Qt object. And so what I'll often do is come in here and add a property, my prop. And then I'll go over into the UI and I'll tie, some Boolean value to this property in constants. Or ideally, I create a separate class with the same name as my backend will be named. And so then when I go over into Qt Creator, I will exclude that QML backend file from my build, and instead I'll compile my C++ backend class that has the same property names. Now all of my .ui files are referencing those same property names, and it just swaps those backends out. And then when I'm doing my design work, though, I can still do a property timer, my timer. I can instantiate a timer. You have to do this in a Qt object because it doesn't have a default property. So you have to give it a property to tie that, that object to, but you can do your intervals and your on-triggered handler in here. And so then you can basically add timers to do different things as time goes on, and simulate the behavior of your project. So for this actually for this example, if I close this out, don't save. What I had done for this project was to go through and add a backend that basically when I add a config to say simulated, in my profile, it swaps in this QML backend so that I can simulate the logic of this industrial machine. So I think I dropped that here into this logic subfolder. If I build and run this guy, we can see the actual compiled output with the backend. But then essentially what I did was I took the C++ backend that we had here in business logic. So we had these nodes using the OPC UA automation protocol. And when I go into the actual nodes, we have these classes: machine nodes, information nodes, miscellaneous nodes, and system nodes. They provide the properties that the UI is relying on to render these things. And so what I did was I wanted to swap out so I didn't have to run the back end. So I created a QML singleton to handle this. And it's named, I believe it's named the nodes. If I can find my main CPP, my sources. It was in main or in client application. Oh, maybe it was in main QML that I did the assignment. Yeah, here it is. So we exposed business logic.connection, business logic.nodes. So this code was previously is tied to this business logic header in C++. Now I've added, if I can find my backend logic, here's business logic QML, which is a singleton. So whenever I set my config to simulated, it'll swap in this singleton, which is named business logic, and it has a property called connection and nodes. And then inside this property of nodes, I have additional objects called machine, miscellaneous, information. And so all of this just swaps in seamlessly in my main QML. So if I build it without simulated, this is using the C++ backend. And if I build it with the config simulated, it'll swap in and use the QML. And in my profile, I just do it this way. If my config has simulated, then I add in this define, and in my logic, if I don't have simulated, I add in all the C++ backends, otherwise I don't. And so I just did some cases within my profile to say that I want to use the C++ backend if I'm not simulating, otherwise I'll use that QML backend. And I end up with a simulator that goes through these state transitions of, simulating a machine factory where we get a percentage of successful completion, and if it passes, it moves down the conveyor belt to the next stage of development. I've got a dashboard that shows more or less my up-to-date, quality standards of what's being generated, and maintenance sliders where I can change the speed. So station 1 should only take 2 seconds. I can go back to my status and you can watch it'll take less time. It'll also result in more errors if you take less time, basically running the machine faster, but regardless, that's the point. So this let me then take this and turn it into a Windows simulator that I don't have to run all the OPC UA backend for, or we can install it on a board and run the simulated version of it without having to set up all the services that are necessary that we don't need all the time. Anyway, a lot of talking from me. Any other questions?
Oh yeah, a bunch.
Cool.
So yeah, we definitely. By the way, it's we're already at the 20-minute mark, but just letting you know. So the next 3 questions are as follows. The first one by Mark is, I'm also curious about the relationship with designer for use with the PyQt. I think you already answered that, but if you want to just reiterate in a sentence, I think.
Yeah. So with PyQt, you're going to typically bootstrap with Python, and it's worth noting, that our Qt for Python extensions use the PySide2 library, which is roughly the same API as PyQt, but it's a different kind of owner of that license. So it's worth noting. But yeah, you'll just basically bootstrap it with Python and give it a QML file to load. And so you can easily use Designer to design out your QML files that should be loaded, that you give So if you give it a main.qml, that main QML can instantiate the files, the .ui.qmls that you've designed with the Design Studio.
The next question is, thank you for that. Sorry, I'm just kind of rushing because we're getting a bunch of them.
Yeah.
The next question is, which is actually great. We really appreciate it, guys. This is exactly what we were hoping would happen. Speak up if you'd like. How about applications that depend on a C++ QML image provider?
Great. So yeah, you've got a C++ class providing the actual backend, right? And so the question would probably is then, can I view that image in Design Studio when I'm using that custom image provider? It's a good question. It's a little bit up in the air. That you can specify, if I go back to Design Studio, so you can specify your import path here. So you can add a path in the QML project file to say C drive, my project / my QML components. And so if your C++ is exposed as like a plugin or something along those lines, you may be able to take advantage of it. But in general, it's not widely tested. So it's a good question and something that we probably ought to take a note of and see, if it's not in our documentation already, how do we define the best practice for how to do that? So I appreciate that question. It should be technically possible because we're just running QML scene and it knows about image provider under the hood. So as long as you are able to provide the plugin, it ought to work. But that's something that that we'll have to dive in a little more to.
Yep. And the next question I think is a little bit for both of you by its nature. The question itself is from Ed. It's could you publish steps for simulating models in QML with config simulated in your profile? These are really great ideas. Thank you. And from my end, I thought, just simulating in QML kind of ties into what you do in Core UI also, but please go ahead. I think this is specific.
Yeah, I think what Bram will show will be very, very helpful as well in this kind of concept of how do you architect a UI like this. So yes, I can share steps. I've actually just recently contributed an update to documentation in Design Studio. We have a page in the Design Studio documentation that describes adding a QML backend for simulation purposes. I didn't incorporate any of the content about how to use config simulated to swap it out. So that's something that can be added. And we can pull up that link and share it as well. But it is out there in our Design Studio documentation for how you can create a QML singleton like this and provide that as a backend.
Are you talking about the page about simulating application logic? Because I can put a link right now.
Yes, this says simulating with JavaScript, something like that.
Yeah.
Yep, that's the one.
Okay.
And so I just contributed that update and it got merged. So I don't know at what point that'll get published to the public website versus, I know it won't be in the product built-in documentation until the next releases of each of Qt Creator and Design Studio, but it'll be there eventually.
That's it. Oh, one question, I guess, for Christine is, will the video be replayed or recorded?
This video here, I don't think we're recording. Oh, are we? Looks like we might be. Good, great. Thanks, Christine. Do you know where we'll be publishing that?
So this will be available on demand for all registrants and the Qt ecosystem to view on our Qt On Demand page. And all of the registrants will be able to receive a recording
Great.
Following this.
Very cool. Well, I've taken up enough time. I think, we wanted to definitely get to dive into Core UI. And so then we'll have some time for Q&As after that. And certainly, want to continue to have an open discussions about these kinds of things as we go forward. So, with that, I'll let Devinder's had a little more time and opportunity to work with Bram in the past, but he's our resident expert on this Core UI architecture. Devinder, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so Bram is actually one of the authors of this Qt architecture for Core UI. I'll let him talk more about it, but I think it's just like a lot of the questions even asked about like how do we get into simulating our QML, and like how do we actually and there was a comment that said, the architecture talk is great. These are some really good ideas, and I think just taking over from there, Bram can really get into it. So Bram is with our team in Germany, and he's a senior software engineer. He's worked on some excellent projects. I've learned a lot from him. So without further ado, Bram.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, thanks Devinder and Corey for really nice introductions. And it was also a nice discussion on Qt Design Studio. I mean, some of the parts that was mentioned in Corey were highly related to this architecture, in a sense that we would like to basically kind of separating the UI from the backend completely, and we can like focus working on the UI itself. So that's a little bit like the highest level of what this architecture is all about. Yeah, a little bit about myself. I have an automotive software engineering background, and I work in several industries around UI back then. And also there is one of Qt's product, which is called Qt Automotive Suite. Um, it's a product that Qt has that allows us to have a multi-process user interface. Like then we can have a like modular application that we can I mean, each application will have their own process and so on. There are some documentations also available online. Feel free to take a look on that. And also another thing is the Core UI architecture itself, which I started with my colleagues back then before I joined Quick Company. And yeah, and then we kind of found this architecture based on our own frustrations that we would like to actually work completely with the UI and doesn't really need to care about the backend in the beginning. The highlights of this topics or presentation would be how we can achieve a UI modularity, so that we're talking about component-based user interface. In the end, we would like to achieve dependency-free of your user interface. This is about the hardware dependencies. And then we would like to enable a UI harnesses. It's a technique for us to harness the user interface itself. So there is no need to really care about the backends, the hardware, and so on, even if it's already in the production phase. So it's not about prototyping anymore. And then this way we will be able to maintain the complexities of the projects or of the software. And again, we're not talking about rapid prototyping anymore. It's about rapid development process at the end. And then we will have a scaled user interface. And this scaled here does not mean about resolutions or so, or the size of the software in terms of pixels. It's about if we want to actually extend our UI into several products so that we can reuse some of the components in our user interface. Of course, it's always matter of challenges that we found when we are working in the UI. Like we normally got a complex UI specifications. For example, in automotive, that we kind of having quite a lot of applications there, and they have their own expectations. And then within our team, we have quite a large number of developers that they shouldn't actually depend on each other, so they can actually work independently. Again, so many hardware dependencies. We have quite limited development time, and like we really have quite a lot of things to do, but normally we only have like a few months to finish all the projects, which is quite hard to achieve. Shareholders' expectations, you know, like we need to actually be able to show the UI with all the animations, the graphics and so on, to let those highest manager to test out the software directly. And this sometimes quite bothering for the developers, because if they have such dependencies to hardware, for example, that they cannot really run the UI at the time that the shareholders would like to present this to some potential clients or something like that, in order to, business analyze and so on. And we would like to close the gap between developer and designers. And then normally we are ended up in low productivities. Right, the core UI architecture itself was authored by me and one of my colleagues, Jürgen. We used to work together in a company called Luxoft back then. It's a partner company of Qt. Then I joined Qt, and Jürgen started his own company, which is called API Year. But we keep maintaining this architecture until now. And it started by Qt Automotive Suite team itself, as I mentioned before, came out of our frustrations. I have applied this architecture in many Qt projects, which was quite successful back then, that we can actually, show the UI even before the hardware are ready, and they can already like bring such demo to some potential customers, or kind of publishing a video, like a release video or so, which is quite important for a company with software. And it actually really proved in helping to boost development time, because at the end, what we would like to achieve is to enhance the productivity, scalability, and maintainability of our user interface. The graphic that we always found is that we start quite high in the beginning in terms of productivity. And then once the hardware kicks in, which I call the complexity, the productivity drops significantly, because again, you're depending on some other team, which might ruin your software by adding some more dependencies, or not working code anymore, and so on. And also there are some needs to recompile everything, and so on. So many burdens or obstacles there when we just want to see an updates of a button, for example. And then we ended up in a situation that our intention is not really the same as what we have at the end. So in the beginning, imagine that the designer create a specification, a design that have such nice animations. And then by the time we start to realizing that the timeline does not make any sense anymore, and we try to make something more simple. And then we ended up in a quite far result of what we actually designed in the beginning. And this is what the developers ended up. And at the end, developer is the one that is to be blamed for not being capable of realizing what the designer has. And this is what we are trying to close, like the gap between designers and developers. So we would like to let them work together to make sure that what the vision that designer has should be really realized in our final product. So in typical UI development cycle, we have interaction designer and visual designer. So interaction designer normally the one who make a UX specification, and visual is the one who delivers some assets. This can be done by using Qt Design Studio that was actually shown by Corey before. Like they can generate their own UI component, which is a QML based code out of their own design, which is coming from Photoshop or Sketch. And by reusing those components, the UI developer can start developing the UI. Well, normally we can talk about prototyping there, but we already use our code that coming from the designer. And now comes the simulation that was actually shown by Corey as well, like one of the examples that we can create a simulated backend. And you see that the UI sits on top of that simulated backend. And this thing goes into a cycle in which that we kind of working together with the designer, sitting together with the developer, we repeat such process over and over again until we reach the right UX and you know, look and feel that they actually meant to have. And then what we are going to use for our product is exactly the same UI code that we started in during prototyping. So there won't be any unused code or thrown away code. We can just reuse everything that we have, nothing being wasted. We just need to change our simulated backend and replace it with the real one, and boom, your product is ready. Now let's jump into the architecture. So let's go into deeper side of the UI part itself. I kind of trying to separate it some components or levels of our user interface. So we can start about the application shell. That's how we try to call it. So it's the application window itself. This is the one that will create the, the window of our user interface. And then there is a stores, which basically encapsulate access to the service APIs or the backend. This is the only place that contains required business logic. So when we're talking about importing Qt plugins, your own business logics plugins that are written in C++ and something like that, or the models, the data coming, and so on. And then the view itself is the only UI component that has a reference to a store that will then provide the necessary data to the other components, which are the panels and the controls. So the panel itself, it's just a UI container for some other controls or some other panels. And controls, it's a reusable visual element. Like if you create your own custom buttons beside Qt primitives and so on. So these are the main part of this architecture. And later we will be able to actually harnessing our UI and like isolating the UI by simulating the backend, create a simulated stores and kind of then able to work only on controls, panels, and views. So the approach that we are trying to take always about splitting the UI and hardware. So the UI will talk to the middle layer or the API. So we need to make clear that the API is kind of agreed between both the UI team and the backend team. So we kind of have a clear API structure, and hardware we just talk to that API and provide some required data. This is how the level of the architectures should look like. So stores, views depending on stores, and stores being only referenced by views. Views will be the one who is providing data to panels and going to higher level. And then stores again will be the one who imports our C++ plugin that will provide the data coming from the backend or simulated backend, which sits on top of the operating system itself. And then again, about the approach on how we should work on this architecture is that we look into the smallest part, which is the control. So we kind of focusing on working on this button, for example, making sure that it's really circle and it's not a rectangle, and kind of making sure the color and the asset looks correct. And then we can talk about something bigger and try to compose like this with some other controls, which then be the panels. And then once we are ready with this, we can then make the view, like we then combining all those panels in one view, and view will be the one who's accessing the stores and kind of fetching the data coming from the API that are initialized in stores and providing those data to controls and panels. And also it's kind of, it's a wrong direction that the the controls, our panels, accessing the stores by invoking some methods that will then forwarded by the stores to the plugins, as well as to receiving some data coming from the view. And yeah, the harnesses would be the technique to isolate part of the UI, as I mentioned before. This will allow the developer to test every single part of the UI independently. And again, what we are trying to kind of encourage here is to enable live reloading. This will help your development time significantly, because then there is no need to actually compile or recompile everything to just see a different color after you change some parameters or properties in on your code. Then we will reach a situation that basically the productivity can kept high even though the complexity arises. It's demo time. So this is probably the most interesting part of it. So I have, let me move this one a bit there. So I have a small Qt examples or Qt application examples. It's a phone application, as you can see here, with just some simple grids of numbers and the contact list. So the contact list here is the one that should comes from the backend. Well, currently it's just a simulated data coming from C++, but the idea is to get this coming from your own services. But what I'm trying to show here is the idea of harnessing your user interface. So let's take a look on the contact list. So I have a harness called contact list harness, which basically just taking the list panel itself. So again, as I showed before, that I have a few stores, panels, and controls, and there is also, there are also some harnesses which I will show here. So I'm going to take the design. I'm using Qt Creator here. It looks similar to the Qt Design Studio because the idea is also that you are able to make some kind of component design here. If you're not really familiar with coding, then we can also take this one. But this time it's already there, so we can just start it directly. Now, what you can see here is my contact list panel. Contact list panel is just some list view with some entries in it and some data. And what I'm trying to show here is, for example, if you have this code ready and you would, you talk to the designer and they see that, oh, they don't really like the blue color anymore. Let's try a pink one. Then I will just set it to pink and you see the changes right away. There is no need to recompile everything. Even before I saving it, I already got it loaded. So it's kind of really boosting your development process. And then you can think of finalizing your list. Okay, let's move it to, change it to red. And then I would like to see the dials grid harness now. We can just click on the design here and it will simply reload the new opened document, which is the dials grid harness now. And then over here, I have my keypad button, which basically delegated as a grid over there. And the designer again come to you and say that, hey, I don't really like the gray color there. Let's change it to red. I can just simply change it to red and everything got changed. And then imagine that you also need to work on some animations, adjustments. Like for example, this button should be animated. Then I can just directly write it here. Behavior on scale. Let's take number animation. Should be, I don't know, maybe 500 because we would like to see how it actually behaves. And I just save it and I can already see that the animations directly apply there. You see that it's really fast. It's straightforward. your designer see the result right away, and they can experience the results or the software that you're working on by themselves as well, because it's again, it's using QML scene. You can also give this to the designer. They can also try it by themselves on their own Mac, for example. If you, as a developer, likes to work on Linux more, then you can just simply give this to your designer, which are working mostly with Mac, for example, because they are working with Sketch or something like that. Then they can just experience this right away. And then once we are sure that they are fine, we can also test the whole main harness. So the one with some options below. So it's basically the same as if you start your own project, which requires the real plugin, which I just write it in C++, like with some number contacts. It's just a basic abstract list model, which then be delegated by the list view. And if I run it, then I would get the real application, which has different data if you realize there, because imagine that this one really coming from the back end, and they actually have the same behavior as you defined before with the designer. So the UI code stays the same, only the data that get changed. So like, I would just move it there back. And then probably what is interesting now, I kind of have a different approach than Corey, but both still for me are nice solutions in terms of simulating data. But probably Corey is more kind of dynamic in the sense that you just need to add some, options when you run the applications. But for me, I'm kind of having two different stores. One is the store itself, which will have the dependencies to the backend, which is the C++ plugin there, and which is this one. And the other one is just some mock-up data that are written in QML. It's just being like the difference would be that here on the harness, I'm importing the mocked one. And when we look into the main view, and I'm importing the real stores there. Yeah, so that's how I actually kind of separating the UI and the backend dependencies. And then we can now work only in little part of the UI, focus on that before we actually talk about the biggest picture of your software. Right, so that's basically the end of my speech for today.
Thanks,
It's time
Bram.
for discussions.
Yep, you got a bunch of questions. The very first question actually I had for you. Could you show again how you just showed the live reloading screen? Did you change the what was it? Just the kit you were using, or how did you get it to run in Design Studio in Qt Creator?
Which part again? Sorry, the design.
The live reloading screen in.
Oh, the live reloading screen. Yeah.
Yes.
Kristen, can you stop sharing so I can share my screen again? Right. Thanks. Yeah. So basically, on your Qt Creator, if it's QML code, let me find so this one. So it's if you open the harness there and then go to the design tab on the left side, and there is start button over there on top. And if you press that, it basically runs the QML scene and load this opened document or QML. If you, for example, open the other harness, which is the grid, and you click on the design again, it will just automatically reload what's being opened there. So it's quite handy. I find it's quite handy. Yeah, because I personally like to code more, and by having such few directly, then it's also quite helpful.
Yeah,
I mean, not only for people who like to design, but also for developers as well.
Yeah, I think that's super handy. We used to have to do this manually, and now it's just built into Qt Creator, which is great. So the next question was, how can we apply the architecture when we have an ongoing project?
Right, that's a good question. It's what I'm trying to always encourage is something that we call micro refactoring. So you can start analyzing your kind of software over there and think of the smallest part of your UI. For example, if you have this phone ready and you would like to make component out of this button, then we can start creating component of this and make sure that it's dependency free. That's the key. So I think because the greatness of Qt is that you can import everything everywhere, which is good, but sometimes dangerous as well. For example, if you would like to just import um, your plugin there, it will work. But once you do this on your controls, on your component, you cannot really reuse this component anymore in any other UI. So try to avoid that. Make sure that it's, again, dependency free. So you have all the like QML components there, and move all the dependencies to the stores. Probably it's, I mean, other than working on the smallest part there, make sure also to create a clean API structure. So you kind of create a nice, you know, API with all the required properties, data, and so on, and not to, I mean, only deliver the required data to your particular panels. So for example, here the dials grid panels doesn't really care about a list. So do not really send a list of contacts to the grid panel. So then your UI is really like kind of making them to be as dummy as possible, so that they will just be showing what the user actually needs or wants at that time, and not really blown with some unnecessary data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's actually just a great way to code in general for Qt, not just for core UI, but in general, I think that's a great practice.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is, how do we ensure that UI components are placed correctly? Panels, views, or controls? If we have several backends, do they go on one store?
Right, that's also another good question. Again, it's a folder structure, so it's kind of easy for us to see directly, like what are the panels, what are the views, and what are the controls. And by looking into the folder structures, we can already see that this will be the view. So it's about making sure that you call it correctly as well. Like, for example, put the view at the end. And if you look into the panels folder, we have all the panels there. So we know that these are panels and they are located inside panels folder. And then controls might be something special because they would be quite, you know, specific on what it is actually. Can be a button or a list item or whatever. But again, it's a folder structures that make sure that you are actually in the right folder. And regarding the stores, the idea of stores is not that you have one single stores for everything, but you can think of a tree of stores as well. So if you have, for example, lists like contact store, can be that you can create your property contact store over there, and then this will be your contact store, and then this will be then the object itself, and later this context model will be there, and then you can think of some other stores afterwards. So again, the stores does not mean to be a single store, but it has to be a tree of stores, so that you are sure that you also have a nice structure on your stores as well, in terms of data coming from the backend.
Great. All right. Well, we're getting a ton of questions. So the next question is, on the example, you create you created pure QML written UI components, the button. What if I have my own control implemented in C++ or also not created in Design Studio?
That's actually the same answer that Corey had already answered before. That you can actually put your custom QML component in a kind of a folder called my custom component or so, and then it's the same principle as the Design Studio, because here we can also use QML project there. We can add the import paths over there, going to the component folder, make sure that you have a QML dir, for example, and they have to be exposed so that the QML can read those components and we can just directly use it there. So it's about importing them and putting the import paths correctly.
Great, nice. All right, the next one is by Ed. It says QML Core UI must be used with and requires purchase of the Qt Automated Suite, or is it optional? And then he says UI harness sounds great. Is the source to your Core UI sample.pro and QML project available?
Right. So QML Core UI is not really a product of Qt itself or a Qt Automotive Suite. So it's really a principle or guidelines on how you actually start your Qt project. So with a normal Qt, like even though it's an open source one, you can still do such architecture as long as you follow the principles and guidelines. So it's not a product at all. Regarding the source of these examples, unfortunately, I don't have it public somewhere yet, but I plan to do so. So yeah, let's see in the future if I find a place for that.
Maybe Christine can follow up on that.
I think we've got some public GitLab repos that we can get your permissions to and post in there.
Right, yeah, of course.
Alrighty, so the next question is by Jarek. Are you able to provide this example code? Okay, it's the same thing. So eventually, we'll have Christine follow up on that. Okay, that's done. Can you show this by John? And it says, can you show the utils.dp function?
Right. Nice. Did someone actually notice about it? So I have my utils singleton component there, which basically, yeah, this is the function that I normally use when we actually working on different monitors. So the aim of this DP function is basically to make sure that your, let me just close this one, that your software actually got scaled nicely, even though you kind of resize it up and down. So you can have the correct aspect ratio and so on. So it kind of fit really to your windows. It's just about calculating the width and height of your final application resolutions. And then, yeah, just recalculated them and giving the scale factors to all of your pixels. In this way, you can get pixel perfectness. For example, if you got the specifications with some numbers around pixels, then we can just simply use it in our code as such. So for example, this item should have height 100, then this will be then rescaled and so on.
Nice. Yeah, it was a nice little gem. Very good helper function.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next one. So which Qt Creator version support this architecture?
For the architecture itself, I mean, as long as you're using QML and you have QML in there, it's already supported since, I don't know, 5 something, even the earliest one. But for the Qt Creator, it's a bit of new features. So the one that I'm using is 4.13. I think I realized before if it's 4.10 or 9, they don't have such feature yet.
You mean the live reloading?
Yeah, the library, but I need to make sure. I'm not really sure about it.
Yeah,
About
and even without it, they could technically kick off live reloading themselves in a separate program. So
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
So for example, if you just run this QML project, you get it. You get the application with simulated data as well. So it's the same principles. It's just that you need to rerun it, but without recompiling your C++ backends. So it's still fast anyway.
Yeah. And we have one more question here. It says, oh, well, it says, what this architecture related to model view delegate? I'm guessing it means, was this architecture related to model view delegate?
Was this okay? Yeah, it's kind of something similar about model view delegate. For example, the contact list there, it's a model, and it gives the data to the list panel as such. So this is the models that I got from there. Sorry, it's this one, and it should be in view that I have my model there, which is the context. But the difference would be that it's kind of a round trip of dependencies. So not only the stores is not only giving data to the view and delegate, but also receiving some methods from the panels. So you can also store, so for example, let's take a look again on my here. So for example, here I have my context plugin, which has this function to actually return the name or number of a single entry. And this actually gets called by the panels, which coming from, sorry, from here, for example, like get phone number and so on. So it's similar to model view delegate, but it's more advanced, I would say, because you can also do methods in there.
Awesome. All right, I see that we've hit the end of the hour, so and we don't have any more questions. So thank you both of you for presenting and taking the time. I personally think the Core UI talk was like one of the big moments for me, just learning Qt architecture. So it's really nice to be able to show that to more people. So and Corey, the design studio presentation was excellent as well. Thank you guys, and obviously Christina and Iris, thank you for setting it all up.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you guys. I have a couple of things to share with all of our attendees today. We do have some upcoming events that we would like to invite you to. The first one is the ST Developers Conference. This is a free online event, so you can claim your free ST DevCon Pass on our events page at www.qt.io/events-virtual ST Developers Conference. We will be having a speaking session and of course a booth at this event, and we will be sharing on the STM32, accelerating the HMI of things with Qt and Touch GFX. In this session, all of the attendees will be able to learn about the best practices for design and development workflow, how to leverage differing technologies with Qt and Touch GFX to fit your use case, and how they are able to create high-performance GUIs to run on the ST hardware. This ranges from the STM32 MCUs up to the MPUs. Another virtual event that is happening during the same time that is also a free event is the NXP Connects. Here we will also be having a speaking session and booth. For this event, we will be talking about minimizing risk when building an instrument cluster HMI. Some of the key insights and takeaways that attendees will be able to gather will be the user experience design methods, such as Agile UX, Agile development, and model view, along with UX vision and minimizing common pitfalls, technical tutorials on how to build a car HMI and creating applications fast and quickly on NXP devices. We have one more event that we would love to invite you to, our very own Qt World Summit Online 2020. This is also a free event that we will be hosting in Europe and Asia specific times and in the Americas time on October 22nd from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. We will have lots of riveting talks. And you will be able to create your own very avatar and experience a virtual 3D rendered experience in Palm Springs. We invite you to join our sessions and be captivated by the demos from us and our partners. And you can do all of this from the comfort of your computer and from your home office. And I'd like to thank our experts today, Corey, Devinder, and Bram, for our very informative and interactive session. We will be ending this session soon, so please note that if you do have some additional questions and you want to get in contact with our experts, you can go to our forum at forum.qt.io to post some questions and open up some additional discussions there, or you can email us directly at info@qt.io. And thank you again for joining us, and we will be ending this session.